You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel, and it's just Eric Vansel tonight because, unfortunately, Daryl ended up going to the hospital today. I don't know why. I hope everything's okay. I mean, he let me know, but he didn't elaborate too much on it, and I mean, hey, doesn't seem like it's too serious, though. I was joking around with him a little bit, so I think he's going to be okay. And the Acolyte review, which normally would have been today, we just moved to Tuesday. And then, of course, tomorrow we're going to be dealing with what's the best medium for Star Wars moving forward. But you know what? I really didn't want to just leave you guys hanging. I mean, I feel so bad. Every time I find out not too long before the show's supposed to go live that one of us can't do it, I don't know. I just feel so terrible when I have to move it, and then, you guys partially plan at least to spend this time. So I thought, you know what? There's stuff going on. I like hanging out with you guys on Sundays. It might not necessarily be an hour show, or it could be a 3-hour show. Every time I do these solo shows, they end up being like forever because you guys end up starting to chat, and, I'm really going to need your help tonight, obviously, because Daryl's not here to carry the show, so I need you guys to chat with me. But the interesting thing is, I thought, you know what? Why not? I'll just put together a show like in 5 minutes and bring it out to you guys. So, to that end, that's what we're talking about tonight. We're going to talk about the Rey movie updates. Now, admittedly, there's really not a whole lot going on with this thing. I mean, this was something that came out like yesterday, or maybe the day before, but I started to see a lot of buzz on it yesterday. And the thing is, you open this article, and this is something that I hate. They do this all the time with Star Wars, right? It'll give you some clickbaity, weird title, and then, you open it up, and it's like maybe a couple of quotes. And full disclosure, that's really what happened here. Basically what happened is the big updates that Daisy Ridley gave, because, it says like, oh, Daisy Ridley's giving these big updates on the new Star Wars movie featuring Rey or whatever. You open it up, and what is it? It's, oh, yeah, well, we're starting soon, or I should be getting a script soon, and we hope to be shooting next year. So, really, it's not like there's a huge update, but the reason why I wanted to do this is because this movie really makes me nervous. I'm not going to lie to you guys. It really does. This Rey update movie, to me, is just... first it was supposed to start shooting in April of this year. And then they said, no, we're moving it forward a couple of weeks or whatever because of the writer's strike. And it's like, all right, that sounds reasonable. That sounds fair. But now, she's hoping to start shooting it next year. She hopes to get a script soon. I don't know. I think that there's something just really, really weird about this whole thing. And honestly, I think that a lot of the cracks in Star Wars are starting to show with this. And so I don't know how you guys are feeling about this, but I'm thinking that, this is just kind of a dangerous thing. And of course, Ted had chatted in earlier. He says, do I see 3 shows in 3 days on my YouTube schedule? Wow, guys. Yeah, well, like I said, I didn't really want to leave you guys hanging. But I want to know, for those of you who are watching live and hopefully willing to chat live, because like I said, I mean, if I have to try to carry the show myself, I mean, I could do it. I've done it before. But this one's kind of difficult because, again, it's like Star Wars does this all the time. And so this is, in some ways, my time to vent a little bit, right? Because, first of all, you have to look at it from the Rey character herself. There's a lot of people that would argue that we don't even necessarily need to see her continue. So I want to take that first. First of all, if you guys are watching live, and you want to chat in. I would really be curious to know if you guys even want to see a continuation of the Rey character. And if so, why? If not, why not? Me personally, I'm not as invested in her character. I don't hate the character. I think that she's fine. Obviously, we've addressed a lot of these issues in the early days when we were talking about, the sequels, when they were coming out and doing reviews and stuff. And then, of course, whenever they would come up with other stuff, we were always talking about how she was overpowered and all this. And look, before anybody starts talking about, well, what about Luke Skywalker? What about Anakin? What about all these other guys? You have to remember that it took place in more time. Yeah, I know everybody counts on the whole element of the Luke Skywalker training with Yoda thing in The Empire Strikes Back. They always focus on that. They always talk about how, this is one of those deals where, 2 weeks later he could suddenly do all this stuff, but he didn't. If you guys remember, when Luke was fighting Vader, I mean, he wasn't really winning. I mean, he was holding his own in The Empire Strikes Back, but it wasn't until later when he got more powerful. The thing about Rey is she was starting to do all kinds of just, really advanced stuff with no training, nobody to sit there and explain to her what the Force was. She didn't have the Jedi text at that time. So there was just a lot of problems with the writing of the character. I think they were trying to pack in too much at once. They weren't really respecting, I don't think, the character at all, or at least what it could have been. Because again, they could have written Rey to be a good character. They just dropped the ball. And again, I blame the whole lack of planning. That's what I think happened. I think it was a big lack of planning. And so I was really shocked when they started coming up with this whole idea of continuing Rey's legacy in this new film that they're coming out with. Now, there's a couple of different things that conceptually I don't think have been totally confirmed. I'm not sure. If anybody knows, if you guys are watching this live, you want to chat that in, that's cool. If you're watching after the fact and you want to put it in the comments section. But I don't think that they actually confirmed that this is going to be episode 10. So that was some of the talk. Some of the talk was this is going to be called New Dawn or something like that. And which is the title of it was actually the first canon novel, by the way. Some say Dawn of the Jedi, but I think that's more James Mangold's thing. But there was going to be, a new order, something along those lines. But there has always been a debate that it could be episode 10. That they might actually put the episode 10 title in front of that. Whether that's a good idea, I guess it makes sense from the standpoint of it is continuing Rey's story. Rey's story did begin in the franchise. Obviously, Rey was a focal character in episodes 7 through 9, so from that standpoint, it does make sense that you just say, okay, well, if we're going to continue along that plot line, then sure, it makes sense to do episode 10, 11, and 12 if you want to make it a trilogy. But the problem that I have with this whole Rey thing, her being the main character, is the fact that one of my complaints, and I think one of the complaints of a lot of people in the franchise, was just the substance. There just wasn't a whole lot of substance. She was, in some ways, a very two-dimensional character. It's funny. One of the biggest reasons why Harrison Ford was always somewhat against reprising his role as Han Solo is because he didn't really love the character. And he didn't love the character because he felt that Han Solo was fairly two-dimensional. He just didn't feel there was a whole lot there. And that's the way I feel about Rey. It's not that I dislike the character. I don't. I don't know. I could take her or leave her. I guess that's how I feel about the character, right? I could take her or leave her. I'm not like super into her, but I'm not one of these people that's just like, oh, I hate this character. I don't. I wish that they had never created or whatever. Because again, I see potential. It's the same complaint that I get all the time from people about the Acolyte. When people accuse me of being a little too soft on it at some point. First of all, if you go back to my reviews of the Acolyte, and again, I know the Acolyte was supposed to be reviewed tonight. You guys are just tuning in. I'll mention this periodically. I don't know how long this show is going to be, especially if nobody really ends up chatting in. I really don't know how long this show is going to be. Again, Daryl's in the hospital. It was a pretty unexpected thing. He let me know about an hour ago. So I was basically left with the decision of, all right, do I do a show? Because I always said, look, I would much rather not do a show than do a bad show. But at the same time, I really like being around you guys and, chatting with everybody and just doing these shows. So, in full disclosure, I did throw this show together like in 5 minutes, and then, well, here we are. But, depending on how much you guys want to get into this, into the live element of it, we could discuss whether or not it would be smart to move forward with Rey. I'm not saying that it wouldn't. I don't know. I'm really torn by this. All right, so Ted basically has something. He says Rey wasn't written well or deep. The character, the franchise, and the actress deserves better. That's actually a good point. I didn't really stop and think about it from Daisy Ridley's perspective because she was obviously new. She was just getting into the business with this, so she was new. So it wasn't like some of these other actors where, we might say, I don't know, Liam Neeson deserved better, even though I love the character of Qui-Gon, don't get me wrong. But obviously, with the prequels, you're bringing in all these Oscar-nominated or Oscar-winning actors, and you're not giving them good direction. The material's a little bit flat at times. Again, the stories were good, but some of the execution was bad. The dialogue was a little wooden and stiff. And it's just like, it just wasn't allowing the actors to live up to their potential. And I think that was the biggest problem with it. And I think Ted's right. I think in this sense, the Rey character suffers from some of the same problems, except it's not so much of a character issue. Right? So by that, I mean that you take a character like Qui-Gon. Qui-Gon Jinn is a well-written character, but it was a poorly executed film and poorly executed direction in a lot of ways. Right? But the character was good. With the sequel trilogy, you almost have the opposite problem. Well, not really, because there was a lot of poor execution there, too. But The Force Awakens actually was pretty good. I mean, I have gone on record. You go back into our What is Star Wars series. I have said that The Force Awakens, it was purposely derivative. A lot of people had an issue with the fact that The Force Awakens was derivative. It was kind of repeating the themes and the same structure as Episode 4. But that was done on purpose. Now, whether it lands with you or not, well, that's a decision that you guys have to make. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But the idea was, it's like poetry. You have rhyme, you have beat. What they were trying to do is they were trying to reintroduce the franchise in a more classic way for a new generation. So what they did was they used a lot of the same structure, a lot of the same plot points as Episode 4 to do that. Now, again, a lot of you might have a problem with that too, because you're like, look, we've been here for, like 40 years or something. We don't need to be reminded. But you do have to look back at pretty much the way that it's been for everybody else. Oh, good. We have Dragonfly. Dragonfly says hello. Hey, Dragonfly. Well, like I said, I'm glad that some of you guys are starting to come in now because, like I said, Daryl's in the hospital. I'm having to do the show by myself, so I didn't want to bail on you guys. So, here we are, and I'm going to carry through the best I can. But that's a good point when you take it from Daisy Ridley's perspective, though, and you hand her this two-dimensional character. And again, she's new, right? So we don't really know even fully what her range is. It wasn't until we saw her in Murder on the Orient Express that we're like, oh, okay, she could do some stuff. And of course, she's done a few other projects since then. Now, she hasn't exactly set the world on fire as far as getting a lot of roles, but that's not uncommon when you start out in Star Wars. Look at Mark Hamill. It took a long time for Mark Hamill to get his footing. And honestly, he became more known as a voice actor than getting traditional acting roles after Star Wars. Now, Harrison Ford was a completely different story. He actually went on, well, first of all, right in the middle of making the original trilogy, he becomes part of another mega franchise in the Indiana Jones trilogy. So he launched that one. But still, you had some other actors too that were doing okay. Carrie Fisher went on to be more of a script doctor. Yeah, she did one of my other favorite movies, The Burbs, which is a great comedy if you guys haven't seen that. It's funny because I almost thought about not even doing a Star Wars thing tonight, but just talking about, I don't know, like Jaws 3 is going to be released on 4K this month, and it's well, actually last year would have been the 40th anniversary, but I believe it's the 50th anniversary for Jaws. So I was actually just going to talk about that, but I thought that might have been a little too much for everybody. But Carrie Fisher went on to do The Burbs. She went on to do a few other projects here and there. I think she was in Postcards from the Edge. But she definitely was more behind the scenes, working on script doctoring. I mean, you would be amazed at the movies that she actually went in and fixed and did some work on. But most of the time, when people are getting their start in the Star Wars franchise, they get somewhat typecast. And, it's kind of a mixed bag, right? On one hand, you become this iconic character in the franchise, and you could pretty much live off of that because you're going to have action figures made. You're going to be written about in novels. So, there's a certain amount of cool element to that because, you become iconic in essence. Your image becomes forever attached to this character. Now, of course, if you're Ahmed Best and you're attached to Jar Jar Binks, well, maybe not so much. That might not work out so well for you. But, if it's something like a Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, or even Rey. Because, again, the Rey character is two-dimensional, overpowered. There's a lot, the whole accusations of her being a Mary Sue. Now, there's still a show that we have to do at some point where Screen Rant, I think it was talking about the 10 reasons why Rey was not a Mary Sue. And I remember reading through those going, I can maybe make an argument for a few of these, but, some of these were off base. But again, you have this movie that's coming up that's basically going to be the continuation of Rey's journey as now the only Jedi Master pretty much left, at least that we know of. And now, much like where Luke was after Episode 6, she now is tasked with rebuilding the Jedi Order. And it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. Because, again, when I say that this movie scares me a little bit, it scares me for a couple of reasons. The first reason why it scares me is because, like I said earlier in the show, all the production problems that seems to be happening. All the things that are happening right now where you're having delays. Now, of course, it was supposed to, like I said before, it was supposed to start in April. That was when it was supposed to start shooting. Keep that in mind. It was supposed to start shooting in April. Okay? Then they said, oh, it was a writer's strike that prevented it. Okay, fine. Then they said maybe they'll start shooting in the summer. Now, keep in mind, this movie is supposed to come out, I think, in 26. There's 2 movies that are coming out in 26. The Rey movie was supposed to be the first one, but I think that they bumped that for the Mandalorian Grogu movie. It's really tough to keep track of this schedule they got going. You basically have 3 movies that are in play. The first one is a James Mangold movie, the Dawn of the Jedi movie, which is what everybody's calling it. We don't know if that's really what it's going to be called, but that's the one that's going to be talking about the origin of the Jedi and presumably the Sith. The second one that you have, of course, is a Mandalorian Grogu movie, which also came out of nowhere. It was just announced, and we think that that's going to take the place, at least in part, of Season 4 of The Mandalorian. We're not sure, though. And then, of course, you have this Rey film. Now, the problem is, it seemed like the Rey movie was going to actually get released maybe a little bit later down the line, but then they started talking about how that was going to be shot first. Like I said, it was supposed to start shooting in April. And then all of a sudden, well, now that's not a thing anymore. So what I'm wondering is, are there some issues? Because in this latest update, upon which this show is based, obviously Daisy was talking about how excited she was. And here's the thing. She said, I should see a script soon. And my question is, well, wait a second. If you were supposed to start shooting this thing in April, which is like 3 months ago, well, why wouldn't you have seen the script? Because she also alluded to the fact that she had seen a script. Now, I know that some people have said that, no, it wasn't actually a script that she saw. She was told about the direction of the character and some of the things that might happen. Like maybe it was more of a treatment or maybe it was more of a synopsis, something like that. And she said that there were some really cool things about it. She was really excited about it. She really loved where the character was going. And she was really eager to get started on this thing. But here's the question, though. She's hoping to see a script next year. Again, it makes me wonder, was this thing tweaked a lot? What are they doing almost what they were going to do with the Patty Jenkins Rogue Squadron movie, where they were scrapping an original idea and starting with something else? You guys see what I'm saying? It's like, it just seems like there's a little bit of chaos surrounding this film, which is typical, by the way, of Lucasfilm under Disney. That's pretty much what we've grown used to, right? It's like, well, here we go again. Okay, Dragonfly's got a comment, thankfully, right? Hey, man, when you're doing this without a co-host, it's a little bit different. Especially, it wouldn't be so bad if I had been prepared for this. But the fact that I had to do this all like 10 minutes before I went live, it was a little different. All right, so Dragonfly says, I think people are going to be very critical of the film, more so than anything before it. Oh, 100%. 100%. I'm going to get into that in a little bit, but then Voyager joins us, and he says, feel better, Daryl. Yeah, he might be watching this. A lot of times if Daryl can't make the show or whatever, he will sometimes watch this. That's why I got to be careful what I say about him. I'm just kidding. I love you, big guy. And then, of course, Dragonfly also says, also shout out to Daryl, get better, friend. Yep, everybody's pulling for him. Again, I don't really know what's wrong with him. He didn't say anything. He just said he was in the hospital. He couldn't do the show tonight. So, yeah, we're all praying that he gets well or, gets through whatever. Otherwise, you're going to have me solo again tomorrow night because I'm not going to cancel on you guys. And I could be more ready for tomorrow's episode. I'll actually have a whole day to think about it. And tomorrow is going to be cool, by the way, because it's going to talk about, it was based on one of you guys' suggestions. I forgot which one of you guys suggested it. I want to say it was Dragonfly, but I'm not sure. About which medium would be the best for Star Wars, whether it's, the films, television, animation, books, whatever. So, that should be cool. Voyager says, unless I get a set photo leaks, I'm not believing that this movie is actually getting made. Pics or it didn't happen. Look, I'm right there with you, man, because, and I just referenced Patty Jenkins' Rogue Squadron film. Where's that? And here's the thing. There were set photos. Remember when she was taking a picture, like by that X-Wing or whatever, and all in the cockpit and everything, like all decked out like a, like some rebel pilot or whatever? It's like, well, what happened? Obviously, once again, they got cold feet on her because of Wonder Woman 84, which, I get that. Believe me, lots of problems with that one. But it just goes to show you that even if you get set photos, even if you get, like on-set interviews, even if you get a trailer, look at Rogue One. 90% of that trailer in Rogue One was just all not even in the movie, right? It was because they had that, and then they did a bunch of reshoots, and they went in a slightly different direction. Which, by the way, isn't 100% uncommon, but, when it was only the second movie under Disney, it was a little bit of a bold move, I think. But yeah, no, I agree. I think that this movie is big time in trouble. I wonder if it's going to get made because, like I said, it was supposed to start shooting in April, and now she's going, oh, well, maybe I'll see a script next year. It's like, well, wait a minute. If you're going to be shooting in April, why wouldn't you have seen a script? Just like a lot of things that I think are wrong with this whole thing. And again, it's the popularity of the character, right? I mean, and of course, to Dragonfly's point, which is absolutely true, people are going to be super critical of this film. I mean, this one, because think about it this way, guys. This is going to okay, let me backtrack a little bit. It might not be the first film released since The Rise of Skywalker. I think, and again, they keep shifting the schedule around. I think the Mandalorian and Grogu movie is still going to be the first one. However, if, like I said earlier in the show, they slap that episode 10 title on it, and it's not a standalone movie where they just make a series of films or maybe a trilogy, but it's not part of the saga films. If they actually slap that episode 10 on it, that right there is really, really going to increase the criticism, or at least the magnifying glass under which people are going to, rate this film or pretty much criticize it. Because if you think about it, this is going to be the first movie that deals with the post-sequel era. And who knows what that's going to be? Because here's the thing, and this is what you got to look at when you're looking at this. You have to look at a couple of different things here. Number one, we know that she's got to rebuild the Jedi Order. That's a given. But who's going to be the main villain in this thing? Are they going to really cheese out and try to do a Palpatine thing? I don't think so, but I wouldn't put it past them at this point. Somebody has to rise up. Now, we did a show on probably last year about the Yuuzhan Vong being the perfect villains for her. And then, of course, we did a follow-up show that said, well, the Yuuzhan Vong could be problematic. Maybe bring the Grisk in. Maybe make them the big bad guys. And that would still fly. They could even, if they wanted to, bring elements of some of either the expanded universe, or they could even bring some of the new canon novels into it if they wanted to. Although I don't think anything actually takes place after the sequel trilogy. So they have this whole open-ended thing that they could do after the sequel trilogy, but they have to get it right. And the reason why they have to get it right more than anything is because this is going to be the movie that actually establishes what's going on, which is then going to trap every creator after that. Because whatever rules, whatever things that you establish in this first film, in this new era, you're going to be bound by that. So in other words, you're going to be trapping future directors, writers, whatever, into whatever parameters you end up creating for this new era. That's just really heavy in the responsibility area. I mean, really heavy. And you have to, I mean, you want to talk about better be sure. Let me see what we got here. Voyager says, we need a character that's super charismatic and instantly likable, has star quality, like Carrie Fisher, Harrison Ford, Mark Hamill, Hayden Christensen, Ewan McGregor. Absolutely. And I think that that's part of the problem. It's Rey's not the most charismatic character in the world. Daisy Ridley is not the most charismatic actress in the world. I mean, she's good. Like I said, Murder on the Orient Express, there was another movie that she got a lot of accolades for. I don't remember which one it was. It didn't come out too long ago. And Voyager's like, we need actors. Yes. Oh, and if you really want to just add to that, we need writers and directors. Not people that are just trying to bring their own agendas. And I'm not even talking about the woke thing at this point, although that's certainly part of it. Some people just bring their own agendas that are just, they have like their own, their own message, their own direction, or whatever the case may be, to take Star Wars. Star Wars has to still feel like Star Wars. And I think that that's the biggest mistake that a lot of these filmmakers are making, is it's like, oh, I want to put my own stamp on it. Now, you could do that. I used to say that a long time ago. I would say things like, in some of the early episodes on the show, I'd be like, man, what would it be like if Quentin Tarantino made a Star Wars film? How cool would that be? And the idea is you're doing Star Wars, but kind of in the style of Tarantino. But again, you have to marry the two, I guess, styles together, right? Like, it can have overtones of a Tarantino film, but it still has to feel like Star Wars. That's why I was talking about getting into some of the genre films. And I don't know, it just gets a little bit problematic to me if you start to try to veer too far away from what makes Star Wars Star Wars. Because if you don't, because look at what happened with Zack Snyder. The whole, oh man, I forgot, what was it, Rebel Moon? Yeah, I think that's what it's called. And we still have to review the second movie, by the way. We did the first one. And the reason why we did it is because it was supposed to be a Star Wars film. It was Zack Snyder's pitch to Kathleen Kennedy for a Star Wars film. And when Lucasfilm officially turned it down, he said, okay, I got this Netflix deal. I'll just go make it and release it under the Rebel Moon thing. Okay, fine. But look at how bad it is. I mean, it's just one of those things where I still enjoyed the first one. I haven't seen the second one. Daryl and I did say we were going to commit to watching it and then reviewing it, which I guess we better do it, because, I mean, the third one's probably going to come out soon. Voyager says, look, I'm a woman, but we need a strong, charismatic, heroic, handsome male lead to star alongside Rey. Yeah, that's actually a good point. An actor with star quality like Glenn Powell or something. Ooh, that would be an interesting choice. Glenn Powell. But no, that's absolutely 100% true. Honestly, I wish they had explored more of the Poe-Rey relationship. Because, Oscar Isaac, I thought he would have been in pretty much the ideal lead, but they basically dropped the ball on that. And now here we sit with this Rey movie, that's in limbo right now. that she's actually trying to bring John Boyega back into it, by the way. I don't know if you caught that. Now, I don't have any problems with Boyega. I just don't think, and Voyager, I think, would agree with this. I don't know how strong of a lead that Boyega would be. He's sort of like that plucky comedic sidekick type character. I mean, and again, don't get me wrong, I love John Boyega's Finn. I thought the Finn character actually was one of the more interesting characters of the franchise, and he was vastly underutilized. I mean, think about it. You had the idea of a stormtrooper having a conflict of, between what the right thing to do was versus what his job was. It was a little bit of a conflict of conscience or something. He ends up defecting. What a great storyline you would have had, and they wasted him. They completely wasted the Finn character. Dragonfly says, extended cut August 1st. Oh, man, it's coming up. I guess we better hurry up and do that review sooner rather than later. Or maybe we could do it where it's like a back-to-back, right? Like we do the second one and the third one on 2 Mondays in a row or something. Ted basically says, Han and Lando movie in a Tarantino flavor would be good. Oh, that would be good. That would almost give you that, maybe that Pulp Fiction or Once Upon a Time in Hollywood kind of vibe, right? I could see that. But again, no matter who it is, even though they can put their stamp on it and they can basically control certain elements, you can't make it to where it doesn't feel like Star Wars anymore. I think that's the problem that people are having with a lot of these Disney Plus shows. The Acolyte in particular. There's a lot of points where things just don't feel like Star Wars. It's like, well, what am I watching? And I think that that's really dangerous. And I think that that's where they're moving into with this Rey movie, because they might... okay, if they put the episode 10 title on it, it will somewhat tie it to the proper saga films. But if they don't, and honestly, if they were going to veer too far away, I would rather they don't. But then again, it's like, well, what are you going to do? I mean, Rey was the central character in episodes 7 through 9, right? I mean, if you go episode 10, it's got to feature her, and it would make the most sense to make something featuring Rey be episode 10. So you do like a 10, 11, and 12, and you give her some villain, and I agree, it should be either a charismatic villain or you do something like you bring in the Grisk. You bring in a villain that's threatening, that's interesting, that already exists in canon. I mean, there's a lot of different things that you could do. And the sad thing is that we as Star Wars fans are always the ones that seem to come up with the better ideas than the people who are actually supposed to be the professionals in making this stuff. And I think that that's what frustrates people. I mean, we're so forgiving, aren't we? Look at us. Every time a new project comes out, it's always the same thing. We have that hope. We measure everything against the original trilogy, basically. But even then, it's not so much just because that's mostly for the quality and everything else. Because it's a large franchise now and it can go in a bunch of different directions. And it's not even about filmmaking. We're just invested in this world. That's why you guys hear me all the time with The Acolyte. Every review, I talk about the poor writing and, bad execution and all that, which we will do when we review episode 7. But it's nice being in that world. We get to play in that world again. And it's also advancing the canon, advancing the lore. We see a light whip now, which of course has been in canon for a long time, but we've never actually seen it in live action. We can enjoy that, in spite of the fact that a lot of things around it are falling apart. but it's because of the world building. It's because the stories a lot of times are interesting, they're just not executed properly. That's the issue. That's really what's hurting Star Wars. And you have to go back to the timelessness of the franchise, of what George Lucas created, of what he actually invented. You know, it wasn't like he necessarily reinvented the wheel, but what he did was he took a bunch of timeless classic influences and combined them. Everybody forgets that the whole reason why Star Wars exists in the first place is because he never was able to secure the rights for Flash Gordon. He wanted to make something like Flash Gordon. He actually wanted to make Flash Gordon because he loved it as a kid. And then when he couldn't get the rights to it, he was like, okay, well, what could I do that's similar, right? Let me make a sort of like a serialized type of Flash Gordon-like thing. And that's when he came up with Star Wars. Now, of course, he had a bunch of help, right? We don't want to discount the team around him. It wasn't like Lucas did everything, but of course, it all came from him. And he basically would look at, say, Ralph McQuarrie's drawings and say, I like this, I don't like that. Okay, use this, redo that. Obviously, all the technological inventions that he came up with, which, honestly, he probably, as influential as Star Wars is, he probably actually was more influential in the technical side of movie making, more so than what people think. So, you have to live up to that. You know, you have to live up to what Star Wars is. And I think that that's the biggest issue that people are having right now. And of course, Kathleen Kennedy and her minions are on a warpath about the toxic fan base and how everybody is, racist or bigoted or, just, oh, you guys hate everything. And look, there is a core of the fan base where this is all true. I mean, if you want to talk about the racism thing, look at the big uproar that happened when you had John Boyega playing a black stormtrooper, basically. Okay, that shows you that there is a segment of the population, that still is a little like, yeah, we don't really need these type of people around. But then there's a lot of other elements where people like Star Wars Theory, people like John Campea, people like Critical Drinker, a lot of these other YouTubers, even Jeremy Johns, are out there giving legitimate criticisms of modern Star Wars, and it's falling on deaf ears because Kathleen Kennedy just dismisses it as, oh, you guys are just being toxic again. It's like, no, we're really not. All we want, how many times have you guys heard Daryl, anybody that watches the show regularly, how many times have you heard Daryl say, all we want is a good story. All we want are good characters. I've said it 500,000 times. So when it comes to this Rey movie, once again, I think it has to start with the story. You could say it has to start with the character, but here's the thing about filmmaking that's interesting. A good story can overcome a two-dimensional character. Now, I mentioned earlier in this show tonight that one of the reasons why Harrison Ford didn't really want to keep playing Han Solo was he saw Han Solo as a two-dimensional, just sort of monotone type character. And that's why he wanted him killed off, because he said that the idea was that Han Solo would sacrifice for his friends. That's sort of the arc, right? He starts out as kind of a selfish, self-centered smuggler, only looking out for himself. And then he has a redemption arc, and then, of course, he would sacrifice himself for his friends. Now, of course, he wanted to die at the end of Return of the Jedi, but they finally killed him off in The Force Awakens. But here's the thing. I would love to get Harrison Ford on the show, well, for many reasons. One, there'd be a lot of views involved if I actually pulled that off. But I would love to get him on the show to prove to him that Han Solo, in fact, is not a two-dimensional character. In fact, that might actually be a good topic for a show. I mean, we always talk about how we're going to delve into the characters, and it's not just going to be, okay, here's the latest news or whatever the case may be. No, we want to get into some characters. We want to, discuss some things, or like what we're going to do tomorrow night, where we talk about, well, what's the best medium for Star Wars, things like that. Those are the kind of things that we would really like to get into, more than just, well, here's the latest thing going on. I've often said we're not a Star Wars news show, we're a Star Wars discussion show. And so it would be interesting, I think, maybe we'll do that sooner or later, where we discuss, is Han Solo, in fact, as Harrison Ford says, a one-dimensional, he says one-dimensional even, I at least call him two-dimensional. But the point is that Rey sort of suffers from the same problem. I feel like she is basically a one or two-dimensional character, right? She's not, and she's vastly overpowered, and there's just like a lot of problems. But they could fix all that. Because again, the biggest problem with the sequel trilogy was the fact that they just didn't plan the thing. They didn't sit down and say, okay, here's episode 7, here's 8, here's 9. Let's figure out what the overall story is going to be. What's the first, second, and third act of this thing, of the trilogy? And then you break that up. Okay, well, what do we want to tell in each one of these films? And then even if you want to have the different directors or whatever, you say, okay, cool. Here's what's going to happen. Episode 7 has to start here, and it has to get to here. Now, JJ, you could do whatever you want, but you have to get to these story points. The beginning, the middle, the end. You have to get there. How you get there is up to you. Same thing with Rian Johnson. Okay, Ryan, now you got to pick it up from where we left off in 7. You have to start here. You got to get to this middle and this end. And same thing with 9. And if they had done that, if they had actually planned that, I think the thing would have been a lot more cohesive, and you wouldn't have ended up with 3 completely different films. Because if you think back to the original trilogy, sure, A New Hope felt a little different than Empire Strikes Back, which also felt a little different from Return of the Jedi, but they were basically the same. They hit the same beats. They basically had a lot of the same feel to them. Whereas if you look at the sequel trilogy, I mean, it honestly felt like 3 completely different movies, right? Episode 7, I think, was the closest to what the original trilogy would have been, or at least the prequels. 8, you went into this really dark, kind of slow, ultra dramatic type of a thing, and it had a different feel to it. If you guys want to have a fun experiment, if you haven't done this already, watch the movies back to back. They have a completely different feel. And then, of course, episode 9, now that feels more like your really fun, swashbuckling adventure movie. The problem with that is the pacing is just insane. And so, again, you have issues. And, of course, the other problem is it was almost like a choose-your-own-adventure thing. After episode 7, it's like, okay, Rian Johnson, you can now go and do whatever you want. And he did. Much to the dismay of a lot of Star Wars fans everywhere, he did. Now, of course, I contend. Now, again, one of our viewers, Ronaldo, that's like his favorite movie of all time. Or at least Star Wars film. With us, we liked it, but it took a minute to process it. And I applaud a lot of the things that Rian Johnson was trying to do, but at the same time, he might have wanted to maybe make a few different choices, right? And then, of course, the same thing with episode 9. That, now it's like, okay, obviously JJ wasn't even the original person doing it. It was Colin Trevorrow. So now JJ had to not only completely rewrite the thing, but now he had to pick it up from where Rian Johnson left off, and this poor guy had to bridge from where Rian Johnson left off, and then he had to wrap up the entire franchise, like the whole saga, right? Because this is the bookend. You had episode 1, and now you have episode 9. So that poor guy, I mean, he didn't stand a chance with the way that it was done. So if they had properly planned it, I think it would have been infinitely better. And so now, of course, that brings us to this Rey movie. The Rey movie, like I said, they have to be very, very careful what they establish in this. because every filmmaker after this is going to be bound to whatever parameters are set up in this movie. The other thing is you have to come up with a good story because, I mean, you know, I think Dragonfly basically said it best, where people are going to be really critical of this thing. Because again, Star Wars has been living in television for a while. And even though people have had issues with some of the shows, or maybe not the shows, but maybe some of the seasons of the show, with television, look, there's always another one in a couple of months. Hey, you don't like The Acolyte? No problem. We got Skeleton Crew coming up in December. Or we got, we'll plug in animated shows in between that. So the stakes aren't that high. I mean, they are, because, you're talking like, Acolyte was like 180 million or something. But I mean, the point is that it's not going to stick in the fans' memory if you're constantly giving them something new. But the real issue comes when you make a film. Because in the movies, it's a completely different thing. People are going to a theater, they're sitting down, they're having an experience. You only make these things once a year. If you're expeditious about it, every couple of years, maybe, if you're, because that was the other mistake I think that Disney made, was that they tried to do too much too quickly. So it's just, I don't know. To me, this whole thing is just really scary. I'll be honest. It is. It's a scary time to be a Star Wars fan, but it's even more scary to be a Star Wars movie fan. I don't think that the Grogu Mandalorian thing's going to be bad. I'm not so sure that if it's in the hands of Filoni, though. I mean, if Favreau is helping him make it, I think it'll be a lot better. But I don't know. I think we could end up with something pretty good there because, again, I think what they're doing is they're taking at least the structure of what would have been season 4 of The Mandalorian, and then they're just making that into a film. Okay, fine. I think that's going to be okay. This whole Dawn of the Jedi movie with James Mangold, he's going to have the same problem. He's got to establish things that are going to be really that are going to affect the franchise in an even greater way than the Rey movie, to be honest. Because now you're taking the whole beginnings of the Jedi, the Sith, whatever, and you're establishing these rules, and now everybody has to follow. Now, granted, some of this stuff was established. You had other things that were established in the expanded universe. And that's the thing. And that was one of the things that Daryl and I were actually debating, because he was like, well, do you really think it's a big deal? And I said, yeah, I do. And the reason I think it's a big deal is because even if people weren't necessarily in love with what some of the expanded universe material laid out, people have been living with it for like 30 years. People are comfortable with it. You start to come in and change some of the stuff. If you change it for the better, you're going to be applauded. If you change it for the worse, well, now you're going to be crucified for it. And not only are you going to be crucified for it for what you've done, but now you have trapped every other, and it's not just filmmaker either. Now you're talking, comic writers, illustrators. You're talking about authors of novels, future directors, writers of movies or television. I mean, they really better be sure when they come up with whatever lore they're going to come up with and not be careless about it. Because that's one of the problems that I have with The Acolyte, actually. I like the concept of the witches. I think a lot of things in The Acolyte on paper are better than they are in practice. I will say that. But the other thing is that in some cases, they're just trying to mess with the lore to mess with it, and they're like in the case of the Jedi, they're creating these things that are contradicting what came before, and It's just a mess. They have to be very careful. So hopefully, we'll see where this goes. Obviously, any more real developments come from this Rey movie thing, we will either do another show on it or we'll keep you guys updated. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this little chat that we had today. I actually, look at this. We're basically at pretty much the normal time, normal duration it would be if Daryl were here talking about this stuff with me. So once again, you guys in the live chat, you pulled me through. You became my co-host, and I really appreciate that. I'll keep you guys updated in the community tab. Like I said, I'm not really sure. Daryl hasn't indicated that he won't be back tomorrow, but he hasn't confirmed that he will. So the way we're going to play this is if he isn't back tomorrow, I will do the show again myself because it's a show I could easily do myself. If he's not back by Tuesday, though, I'm going to hold that off until next week, and we'll just review 7 and 8 together. Because I don't like to do review shows because, you'll get like all these episodes where he and I have reviewed them together, and then there's one where I'll review myself, and then everybody's like, I wonder what he thought of it. I don't want to do that. I would much rather wait until he could do the show with me. So hopefully he's back with me tomorrow and everything's back to normal. If not, like I said, you'll see me, and we're going to be talking about what's the best medium for Star Wars. So hopefully you guys can join me or us tomorrow night at 8 p.m. We'll be live. Appreciate you guys talking to me tonight. Don't forget to hit the like, the subscribe button. You guys know the drill. You know what it does. I don't have to tell you at this point. Just hit those buttons for me. Help the algorithm. Help us get this show in front of more eyes. Of course, you can always join me on the Discord channel. We've gotten a lot of really good conversations on the Discord channel. So be sure to see us there. And of course, all the socials. Facebook, Instagram, X, which is formerly Twitter. We're at head-to-head-SW. You can check us out there. All kinds of places you guys can check us out. But the point is, we could keep this conversation going even in between shows. Which, we're doing like 3 this week, so... I mean, you could pretty much watch us on YouTube this week, but hopefully you guys join us on our socials or Discord. So with that, oh man, I got to do this outro myself. This is going to be so weird. Well, I'm Eric Vansel. May the Force be with you. Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at head-to-head-SW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at head-to-head-swpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.